Hello everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me today. It's really good to be here. Digital transformation. We talk about it a huge amount, don't we? It's the in buzzword that flies around institutions, but I'm not really that sure that we all have a kind of common view of what that is, either across the sector as a whole or even within our organisations. So today I want to kind of explore a little bit this subject of digital transformation. What is it? How does it affect us? Where do we go with it? How do we approach it? But it actually all begins with an even more fundamental question. A question that I think causes a huge amount of confusion within many organisations. And that question is very simply, what is digital? Because I'm not sure we're clear on that either. We talk about digital teams, don't we? Digital technologies, digital transformation, digital strategy. But do we all have a common understanding of what that is? Do marketing professionals see digital the same way as you guys do? And actually, I think that the problem is that in a lot of times we think of digital just as a set of technologies, coming together of various technologies. You know, at a very, very high level, you're things like the web, email, social media, the mobile, but on top of that, things like the cloud and various other technologies that have come along. Is that what we mean when we talk about digital? Or, in truth, is it actually something more? Because I actually think that really digital is much more profound than the set of technologies. Because technology is a really interesting thing. Technology often has far wider ramifications than what we originally thought it would be, or the intention for which it was built. So I've got a couple of examples up on the screen. For example, the printing press, right? A piece of technology. Now, when the printing press first came along, it didn't just allow you to print books. It had a far more profound impact on society. Once the printing presses arrived, literacy levels went up. That improved education. We also saw the fact it actually started to undermine the power of the Catholic Church, because now people could read the Bible for themselves. So there was all kinds of ramifications to that piece of technology and its impact on society. Another great example of that would be the Industrial Revolution and the arrival of the factory line. The factory line didn't just allow us to produce goods faster, it also had a profound impact on society. You had suddenly urbanisation happen, people moving from the countryside into the cities. It changed the very fabric of society. And a few years later, the automobile came along, right? And then all those people that had moved into the city all now moved out to the suburbs. So a single piece of technology can have a profound impact on society. And what we're seeing at the moment is a huge number of different technologies all coming together, and that is creating an enormous tsunami of change on our society as a whole. I mean, it's even changing our brains and the way that we think and the way that we behave. It's changing our language. It's having all kinds of profound impacts on us. So we find that it's actually neurologically rewiring our brains and how we think. But also it's changing how we see the world. Especially with the new generation that are coming into the workplace, the millennials, let alone the digital natives that are coming after that. You know, everybody in this room, we've had to adapt to these technologies, but there's a new generation that have been born into these technologies, and it's shaped their very thinking. Hey, just imagine ourselves, right? How big an impact digital has had on us. Take, for example, that moment you wake up in the morning, this morning, when you woke up in your hotel room, all right? What was the very first thing you did? I'm betting you went, picked up your phone. Who didn't do that? Raise your hands if you didn't do that. Well done, you are real human beings. Congratulations on still maintaining your humanity. The rest of us, we've turned into essentially cyborgs, right? That is the definition of a cyborg, right? So we are so embedded in technology that it's influencing our behavior. And especially with the generation that we're trying to reach in terms of student recruitment. These people see themselves as consumers, not as students. The relationship has fundamentally changed. They're used to having a plethora of choice, more choice than they'd ever had before. And of course, alongside that then, becomes incredibly high expectations, right? They're used to using all of these products for free. And they provide amazing experiences, powerful technology. It enables them to do all kinds of things that would have been unimaginable to us as a generation. And then they don't understand why they get crappy systems from you guys when they're paying £9,000 a year in tuition fees. They get this for free. Okay, they're giving away their privacy in the process, but they don't care about that. So why then are they getting a second-rate service from you? They expect outstanding customer service. They expect to be able to get answers to their questions instantly via social media and any platform that they happen to be using. They expect 24/7 support. And if they don't get it, they complain. And they complain very vocally. You see, the whole dynamic has switched on its head now. It used to be that you guys, the universities, had the voice because you had the budget. Now, every single one of your students has a voice, has an audience, has the means to publicly embarrass you. You're one disgruntled student away from a PR disaster. Now, that's marketing's problem, so we don't care. But it will come back and bite you. So we live in this radically different world. They also want self-service. Now, this is a really interesting one. That this is a generation that wants to be able to solve their own problems, do their own things without having to speak to a human being and get them to do it. So, did you know that there was a survey done that said 68% of millennials feel better about you as an institution and even themselves as a human being when they can solve a problem themselves rather than turning to you. So that has huge potential. They hate wasting their time on hold or going from department to department or talking on the phone and stuff. For them, time is one of the most valuable commodities that they have. So really, when we ask the question, what is digital? It's actually not about technology. It's about people. And it's about the changes that we're seeing in people's behavior, the new generation of connected consumers. Now, if you see digital in that regards, then that has a profound impact on every one of our organisations, because we're essentially seeing an end to business as usual. What worked in the past no longer does. All of our preconceptions, all of the ways that we work, all the ways that we operate have to be reconsidered. All of our policies, our procedures, our standard operating procedures, all of that needs to be changed. We need to start thinking about digital first. Digital needs to be driving our organisations, not just simply bolted on the side, which is what has been happening. The truth is that digital has just been treated as another IT service. But actually it fundamentally changes the way, or should fundamentally change the way that our organisations work and operate. And failure to adapt is actually killing organisations. It's undermining our credibility. And we're seeing this time and time again in other sectors. And it's fundamentally changing education. This cultural shift that we're experiencing is leading to a whole plethora of changes to the educational sector in terms of distance learning, in terms of MOOCs, all of these kinds of things, but also increasingly non-university alternatives as the cost of university becomes prohibitively expensive for many. There is a serious risk that some of your institutions are going to become utterly irrelevant. And we've seen this time and time again in other sectors. Blockbusters became irrelevant because of Netflix. The high street retail music industry became irrelevant because of iTunes. Kodak closed their doors because of digital cameras. And it goes on and on and on and on. Every single sector. And yet every other sector is in denial. Oh, it won't happen to us. But there are already people sniffing around the higher education sector. People from the outside, startups, big names like Apple, that are sniffing around the sector, trying to redefine it and redirect it. And the sad truth is that when you look at sectors that have been disrupted and have fundamentally changed, it's very often a new player that does it. Because the existing player is unable and unwilling to adapt to the new reality. Look at Uber and taxi drivers. Every taxi company fears Uber coming to their city. Because Uber has disrupted entirely. The guys that founded Uber knew nothing about taxis, right? And the taxi business. Yet they've completely and utterly redefined that sector. I think that could happen in education too. And I'm not alone in that. This is a great quote from Harvard University, and it's referring to digital. It says, the solid classical buildings of great universities may look permanent, but a storm of change is threatening them. That is the reality of where you're at. But I don't think most people in the higher education sector accept or acknowledge that. I think there is a significant danger that some large institutions will start closing their doors in the next 10 to 20 years. Because the truth is that most universities are fundamentally digitally incompatible. They're decentralized, slow-moving, unfocused. They've got many layers of management. They exist, their mindset is stuck in this world of high cost of failure. So there's endless processes and procedures to minimize the impact of failing. But that is not the world of digital. The world of digital is an environment where you can fail fast, move fast, experiment, try. There is a deep-rooted fear of making mistakes. And when it comes to digital, that doesn't need to be as big a concern. As a result, many organizations have been running their digital projects as these big monolithic IT projects that are causing fundamental problems. Birmingham City Council spent an unprecedented $2.5 million on its website, running $2 million over budget. Because they treated it as a monolithic IT project. This one is my personal favourite. When the Department of Trade and Industry website existed before GDS came along, Government Digital Service, every time a user visited the website, it cost £11.78. Do you know when I found that? What the first thing I did was, went to their website, refresh, 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 refresh. And then I realised I'm a taxpayer. Okay. Healthcare.gov is the classic example. These figures are a bit out of date, actually. They've currently, or when I created this slide, they'd spent £319 million on healthcare.gov, and that was set to rise to $677 million. Sorry, not pounds. Makes a big difference with those kinds of numbers. And so it goes on and on. Example after example. So the question then becomes, well, how do we do this right? How do we do things differently? How do we go about transforming our organizations? And that's where this word digital transformation comes in. Now, digital transformation is something that is sweeping across many, many organizations, both in the higher education sector and beyond. Organizations that are really beginning to get it and transform at a fundamental level. There's just one that I want to highlight from this list, which is UCAS. I'm working a lot with UCAS at the moment. And they are fundamentally reimagining absolutely everything they are doing as an organization, right? They are neck deep in it at the moment, a digital acceleration process. Well, I get a sense from working with the higher education sector, and I've worked with well over more than 30 higher education institutions, that you're dabbling in it. Sorry to be blunt. You're trying to play, do bits, kind of keep up to date, but you're not fundamentally reimagining who you are and what you do. So, how do we do this? Well, the first part of it is finding some degree of focus. It's very basic stuff. But universities typically pull in so many different directions. They've got so many different initiatives. When I go in and work at the university, I often go in and I work on some aspect of the user experience, whether it be advising on how the website is built, or whatever. And inevitably, as I get into the project, it's like, oh, well, we're also trying to procure a new content management system. And then there's also the work that we're doing on the CRM. Oh, and we've got this system going as well. And then we're looking at expanding this area. We're going through a rebranding process at the moment. And the organisation is flying off in all these different directions all at the same time, trying to get those things to work with one another. There's no focus. There's no focus in terms of the organisational objectives, and there's no focus in the audiences as well, and simply prioritising audiences. There's fundamental stuff that is missing from many organisations. Now, I'm purposely exaggerating all of this. But these are problems that I see time and time again. There needs to be clear objectives for your digital direction. A clear focus of what you're trying to do, and a digital by default thinking. So often we fall into kind of knee-jerk reactions of doing stuff that we've always done. Let's pick on IT's arch enemy for a moment, which is marketing, right? I know the truth, right? They do it all the time. Marketers are terrible for knee-jerk behaviour. So a great example of that, of a lack of digital by default thinking, is a new piece of research. You make an amazing discovery as an institution. Okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to promote it? Oh, we're going to put out a press release, because that's what we always do, what we've always done. But perhaps these days we should be thinking digital first. Not that digital's always right, but asking, is a social media campaign a better approach? Should we be blogging about this instead? Are there digital solutions to this problem that we're trying to address? And I've seen some really classic examples of this stuck mentality. I once worked with a charity that remained nameless, big national charity, that year on year poured millions of pounds into TV advertising. And it always used to work really great for them, advertising on TV. And they didn't understand why it wasn't anymore. It wasn't having the impact that it used to be. And what had happened is, over the years, when they first started doing this, they used to put their telephone number as their call to action, right? Ring up and make a donation. But over the years, they'd adapted to digital. They'd digitally transformed by replacing that telephone number with a website. Right? That was it, apparently. That's all you needed to do. The only change in thinking that needed to happen. And then what happened then, the problem is their website was shit. Right? Its conversion rate was running at 0.32%. I mean, it was insane. And I said to them, look, if you stopped, their average gift was £35 per gift, which wasn't a bad thing. And if we managed to increase that rate from 0.32% only to 1% by just stopping advertising for 1 year, right, and spending that money on digital instead, that effectively that would make an extra £2.5 million in advertising for that year. Now, they couldn't get their heads around that. The idea of stopping one thing to do another. So they carried on oblivious. But do you know what? To get that extra 2.5 million by advertising in exactly the same way as they had been would involve them driving an extra 31 million users to the website that was converting so poorly. But they couldn't change their thinking. They were stuck in that place. There needs to be clear strategy, new thinking, and new direction. We also, and this is a big one for higher education, we need to start empowering staff. Giving them authority to make decisions, freedom to make mistakes and learn from them. Not afraid to make changes without going through a committee and collaborating endlessly. There's a great company called MailChimp that do email newsletters. I don't know whether you're aware of them. They're quite a big company now. Several hundred people work there. And they've got this culture, or the CEO, Ben Chestnut, has worked hard to build this culture of empowering employees. And one day he came into the office and discovered that the strapline on the website for the entire organisation had been changed. No one had told him. He asked around. Nobody knew anything about it. There'd been no committee formed or discussion had. It'd just been changed. Eventually he managed to find out that it had been changed by the head of UX. And he asked this guy, what happened? Why did this get changed? And, why was there no discussion? He said, oh, well, I've been doing A/B testing on it for a few months, and this is the one that came out best, so I put it live. And even Ben struggled with that. But he said, that's great. That's how it should be. And that's how it should be in your organisation as well. That your staff have the authority to make their own decisions and move forward. We need to start building a start-up culture. Because, we heard in the last talk about this need to sprint and be agile and that kind of stuff. You can say that all you want. And you can write it all down. But if you haven't shifted the culture, if you haven't changed the way the organisation thinks, then people aren't going to live that. Because they don't feel that they've got the authority. They're afraid to make decisions without consulting with absolutely everybody. We need to be unencumbered by large institutional systems if we are going to keep up with the rate of change that's going on. We need to let go of things like long-term planning. 2025? 2025? I've no frigging idea what's going to be happening in 2025. And neither have any of you. Let's stop being delusional about this stuff. The government digital service won't plan more than 8 months ahead. And rightly so. Now, I'm not saying you can't have broader visions, but any kind of long-term digital planning is absolutely ridiculous. But a big part of creating this startup culture is actually shifting our thinking. I love this quote. You've heard it before. It's easier to ask for forgiveness than get permission. Now, you see a quote like that and you think to yourself, oh, yeah, but they don't work at a university, right? That came from a lady called Grace Hooper. She worked for the American Navy. Now, if ever there was an organisation full of bureaucracy, standards, chain of command, and things like that, it's the Navy. Yeah, it's fundamental. We need to challenge existing thinking, which is very discussion-based and committee-based. We also need to start building new processes. We need to start challenging the existing processes if they're slowing things down. I'm going to dob on UCAS. Is there anyone from UCAS in? Thank crap. Right. Sorry, excuse my language. This isn't being videoed or anything, is it? It's not going out on the internet, is it? Yeah, that's fine. I'm ignoring the nods. Right. So when I worked for UCAS, one of the things that I was involved in doing was creating a comms strategy, right? Helping them communicate what digital transformation is to the rest of the organisation so people could understand how to bake it in. And we had many different ideas of what we could do. But one of the simplest is, let's just shove up a blog. Right? Start sharing digital transformation best practice. I said, oh, we could do that. I'll do that. I'll sort it out for you. Don't worry. I'll just open up a Squarespace account. We'll get up and running. And the lady I was working with said, no, it's all right. Let me set it up because then, you know, it's not coming off your credit card and all the rest. Oh, okay, cool. I said, I'll get it up and running in 10 minutes. Really easy to get going. 2 weeks later, nothing had happened. And I was like, what's going on? Yeah. Well, the IT department was worried about security, and the legal department were worried about our data being held in America, and compliance people had some questions over it, and it went on and on and on. It's a frigging blog! It shouldn't be that complicated. And you've got to remember that you're now competing with all kinds of different ways of learning. You can't continue at that kind of speed. I'm just telling you off, aren't I? This is real fun. Right. We need to replace our systems with lightweight systems and move away from that kind of heavy documentation, specification kind of approach. We need to end our endless specifications where we, you know, oh yes, we need to buy in, we need a new content management system to run our website. Right, let's go out to an invitation to tender to 3 people and we'll write a massive specification of absolutely everything we want this CMS to do. And we'll go through this long, laborious process that, in my experience in universities, can take up to 3 years to purchase a content management system. Right? We need to move away from that kind of thinking. And then you get this thing in and it's, you know, and then people start moaning about it because it's not flexible enough or it doesn't do what we want to do. It's because you're trying to work out everything beforehand. You don't know everything it wants to do beforehand. The same is true with committees. You know, you create a web steering committee with all these different people, but it can only meet every 6 months. Because there's so many different calendars and diaries to coordinate to get everybody in the room at the same time. So it means decisions are only made every 6 months. Again, I might be exaggerating. So instead we need to start building prototypes. We need to demonstrate stuff, show rather than tell. That's why I loved the last talk with the little Minecraft demos, right? That people get, that people understand. And it's a common language. You can write a long specification document and people will all disagree about what it meant. But if you've got a working prototype, even if it's rubbish, it doesn't integrate with anything at the back end, but if you have a little working prototype, people can all see it and understand it and have a common vision. And it's also something you can then test, of course. It's also, there was a question, wasn't there, about how do we encourage people to move across to the cloud and overcome that kind of fear, you know, of doing things differently. And prototyping and piloting is the way to do that. So we need to get that built into our culture. But we need to not just use these as a discussion document internally, we also need to do them as somewhere where we can test. Something that we can put in front of users. We need to establish a common understanding of the user experience and a common, you know, regularly testing. Here's a question for you. Who of you in the last 6 weeks sat in on a usability test session? Brilliant. You guys are awesome. Who's done it in the last year? Better? That's pretty, well, no, not better, but more hands go up. Who has never sat in on a usability test session? Be honest. Yeah. Do you know, in the government digital service, they have this policy which says, if you haven't sat in on a usability test session in the last 6 weeks, you are not allowed to input on a project. Because you're too removed from the user's experience to be able to contribute value to it. Now, I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong, but I am saying that we need to bake in listening to users as a fundamental part of our job. Here's a random question for you. What's on the walls of your office? Not just your office, but the university as a whole as you walk around. Is it vice-chancellors looking intelligent and sophisticated and painted, right? Staring out in the world and passing their legacy on to future generations? Is it fancy buildings that you spent huge amounts of money on? Is it maybe important people shaking hands? Or researchers holding up their I don't know, awards? How many of you, raise your hands again, how many of you have pictures of students on your wall? Good. And that's the way it should be. Constantly in front of us, all the time, needs to be our target audience. All the time. In MailChimp, as you going back to MailChimp I talked about earlier, as you walk around their offices, they have personas up on the wall of the different people they're trying to reach. So that every time they look up, they're looking at their target audience. They're constantly in their mind. We need to bake, and this is a huge one, we need to bake customer service into our organisational DNA. Universities resent students, which makes me giggle. Okay, let me reword that. Academics resent students. That has to change. You're not in the 1970s anymore. Do you know, when I went to university, it was a bit later than the 70s, I got a full grant. I came out debt-free from university. That totally changes your attitude towards university. We still are underestimating it, and we need to start listening to our users. This is another big one. We need to end finite projects. Right? We still treat digital projects with a set budget, don't we? It's got a certain budget, a start point, a middle point, and an end point. We treat it like building a building, right? So you plan it, and you go through all these phases of specifying it, going out to tender, getting the architect in, getting the plans all ready. Right, we're ready. Then you go out to tender, you get in a contractor to build it, they build the building. We're done. Okay, we need to get some cleaners to do a bit of maintenance, but that's it. That's how we treat digital. But in truth, digital is like a garden, right? You plant it, and to begin with, it's a bit shit, really. It's not great. And then, but it grows, and you prune it, and you weed it, and you put in new plants, and it matures, and it becomes better. And the longer the garden is there, the better it becomes. That's digital. We need to move digital from being a capital expense in our organisations to an operational expense. I look at the amount that universities spend on their physical assets, their buildings, and I compare that to what they spend on a yearly basis for their virtual assets, which, by the way, your millennial audience value just as highly. I can look at my own son, who walks around like he's been dragged through a hedge backwards, yet he'll spend his hard-earned money on buying virtual outfits for his avatars. So these are people that value. You laugh, but that's their value system. These are people that value virtual as much as physical, yet we spend money on digital nowhere near like we do on physical. And we don't treat it as an operational expense. Then, of course, we've got to start, alongside this, is we need to start changing the way that we run these projects as well, because, you know, we've already heard a bit about agile and minimal viable products and that kind of stuff. But we still treat our projects like these big, huge, monolithic IT projects in so many cases. So instead of building a car, we need to start by building a skateboard. Put it out there in front of people. Start monitoring the feedback. Do they like the skateboard? Are they happy with the skateboard? No, they're not, because they wobble and they feel like they're going to fall over. So what we do is we add a handle for them. And we send it out there again. We put it out in front of people again. Still not very happy with it because it's hard work getting up hills. So we put gears on it and call it a bike. Put it out in the marketplace. Test it. Show it to people. Do they like it? Is it what they want? Are we meeting requirements yet? They're still finding it hard to get uphill because they're morbidly obese because the sugar tax hasn't come in yet. So we put an engine on it. Now, it might be at this point that they're perfectly happy. And we stop there, that we never need to get to the final stage of building the car. So we save ourselves money as well. So minimal viable products is a really good way of making sure you're building the right thing for your users, rather than these huge specifications. Now, although I've said that we need to do away with committees, I'm not saying that we shouldn't bake in a collaborative approach, a cross-disciplinary approach, because another huge problem universities have is they're very, very siloed. And there is this kind of, I joked earlier about relationships with marketing, but they're just one example of how things aren't always as smooth and collaborative as they should be. So we need to break down those silos, letting go of managerial structures. But I'm not talking about more meetings and more committees. What I'm talking about is cross-disciplinary teams working together. Actually physically moving around, going and sitting with other people, side by side, working with them. And of course, in all of this, I am very aware that you've got a lot of legacy to deal with, and that that's difficult. And that the moment may come where we need to stop. Stop pushing out new features, new systems, new this, new that, new all the other. And we need to stop, take stock, get good foundations in place before moving forward. So I know what I'm asking you is scary. That I know it feels risky. I know it means challenging the fundamental aspects of universities. I know I'm talking about transforming the sector. But if you're not going to be the ones who push this, then who is? So I'll leave you with this. I wrote a book called Digital Adaptation. Now, you'd think I'd call it digital transformation, but I picked the word adaptation purposely, because it reminded me of a quote by Charles Darwin that I think perfectly sums up your current situation. And that quote is, "It's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It's the ones that are most adaptable to change." And I think that's where you're at as universities. I don't care whether you're a Russell Group university or not. I don't care that you've got hundreds of years of history behind you. If you cannot adapt to change, eventually I think your organisation will die. So on that cheery thought, thanks very much.
Oh, there we go. Paul, thank you very much for such an energetic and challenging, thought-provoking talk. I think we've got time just for one or two questions, if you're willing.
Yeah, of course. So feel free. I mean, we've got a break now, so you can always come up and talk to me then.
One question over here on the left. Thanks, John.
I can hear you. Nobody else matters.
I'm Heather B and I'm from Northampton University. How do you marry up the kind of the millennials and the people who are really into digital with the mature students, the postgraduate students who are perhaps slightly older and make up a larger proportion of higher education in terms of just numbers, who don't want to work in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. Digital should never replace other mediums. So you can't just say, oh, everybody's self-service now, we're not going to have a telephone number anymore. Or we're not going to, there's not going to be any printed versions. What you'll do is you'll decrease the amount of resources dedicated to those kinds of more traditional things and increase the amount that's sent with digital. But no, you're a long way off before you can start switching off other mediums. They still need to exist.
Okay. One more question here.
As that was a nice short answer. Very unlike me.
Hi. How do you deal with the cultural differences? We're talking here about, so my generation, I look at some of the things kids do on trains and I'm scared that I'm going to have a job in IT because the difference between what a 20-year-old's doing now and what I do in my day job's not that different.
Yeah.
Now, if I'm struggling with that, how do we deal with the cultural differences with perhaps academics that are often major decision makers in the university because they're even one further step away from that?
Yeah. Okay, I mean, there's a whole talk in that about common strategy, cultural change, change management, that kind of thing. The one thing that I would suggest is you need to show the problem, right? You need to show academics the difference. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do that. One is you can get them into usability test sessions, okay? You can show them users interacting. Getting them in might be hard, so the other way you can do it is create what I call a low-light reel, where you video usability test sessions, all right? You edit them together into like a 2-3 minute chunk of all the pain points that people are experiencing and show academics that. Also, academics do respond well to empirical evidence. So data gathering and statistics and that kind of thing, and building up a good business case, an argument for these changes and why changes are required, it is worthwhile. But it's a huge subject. I'll happily talk to you more about it over the break.
Okay, thank you. I think we're out of time now, but as Paul says, he is around over the break.